would love to have us start just by having you introduce yourself.
Well, I'm Bob Welch. I am a former columnist with the Register Guard. I'm author of a couple of dozen books and a speaker. I was a former adjunct professor at the University of Oregon School of Journalism and Communication. I teach a writer's workshop, and I love words. And the Oregon Daily Emerald helped me love them all the more.
Yeah, absolutely. It seems like the world of journalism and writing has been calling your name for years, considering your experience both at the Register Guard in Eugene, also the Bulletin in Bend, and
Yeah.
the Journal American in Bellevue, Washington.
Yeah.
But
No,
even
it's
before
been calling
that,
me since I was like age 10. Like
yeah, I was gonna
career
say, yeah,
career day, fifth grade, in Corvallis. I was a Beaver to begin with. I went and interviewed the Oregon State basketball coach because I wanted to be a reporter, and I've just been smitten with the idea. I thought it was magic that I could, in eighth grade, I would call in the results of our basketball game on Tuesday morning, and in that afternoon's newspaper, there would be a story. There was just magic to me about the whole idea of gathering news and then being able to see it in the newspaper, and to be part of the process was all the greater. You know, we grew up in Corvallis. Most of my friends go to Oregon State, but my mom said, you know, if you want to be a journalist, you should consider the University of Oregon, and they've got a school of journalism. And they also had Bobby Moore, who played on the football team and had these really cool long white socks and white shoes, and he was just the coolest looking running back. So between Bobby Moore, number 23, the tailback for the Ducks football team, and my mom's recommendation, I wound up at the U of O in 1972 and started working at the Oregon Daily Emerald.
yeah, absolutely. Aside from, journalism sort of feeling like magic, was there anything that drew you to the field initially or anything that sparked your interest in it?
I just always thought it was amazing. You know, they call it journalism history in a hurry. I was just smitten. I delivered newspapers as a kid. I read them. I remember thinking when I grew up, I want to be the sports editor of the Corvallis Gazette Times. And I actually wound up writing Little League Baseball for the Gazette Times when I was 15. And then in high school, I wrote some sports stories for the Gazette Times. Um, when I came to the U of O, I got to work part time at the Register Guard, and that, you know, one of the finest mid-sized newspapers in the nation at the time. Certainly not now, since it's been bought by the Gannett, but it was great back then. So yeah, I just always been into it, and the Emerald kind of fueled that fire in that for the first time I was kind of I mean, I got to come up with ideas. I mean, in the back in Corvallis, it was them telling me what to do,
Yeah.
and the Emerald, it was more like, okay, here's a palette, go paint us something, and it wasn't always, you know. I remember the transition was difficult. I think I was the state high school journalist of the year, and in the spring of '72, and in the fall, I was covering field hockey or something, but you know, you just learn to be patient, and you grow and you learn, and pretty soon I was getting to cover more, you know, big time sports, and I also learned from the like Becky Sisley, who went on to be the women's athletic director at the U of O. I mean, literally, they were having bake sales to run their field hockey program. What kids have today at the University of Oregon, unbelievable. I mean, with the students, the big ice cube, the athletic student study
Mhm.
center, and Matthew Knight Arena. Oh my gosh, it was so different back then. I mean, bake sales so they could, you know, buy some uniforms and have a field hockey team. So a lot has changed. And then I was there just as Title IX, 1972, Title IX was taking effect. So I got to be in on the kind of the rise of women's sports, which was cool, and to see all that happen. And you know, again, a lot of people just take it for granted that it's always been that way, but no, it took that federal law to get people in gear. And even, you know, even then we're still struggling to have women get all of the advantages that men have. So
Absolutely. Yeah.
yeah.
And you were the sports editor at the Daily Emerald from 75 to 76, is that correct?
Correct. Yeah, that was my senior year. I'd worked my way up, and it was just I guess I was just kind of amazed. Being in Eugene is, I think, a little bit different because I mean, as a freshman in college, I wound up interviewing Steve Prefontaine, the finest middle distance runner in the world at that time. And I'm talking to him, and I don't think he was, you know, I don't think he was all that happy talking to me that morning. He was kind of, he seemed distracted, but I got to interview him. Ronnie Lee, we had a basketball team that was known as the Kamikaze Kids. And Ronnie Lee was a star of that. He was one of my first interviews. And then, yeah, I worked my way up, became sports editor my senior year. And that's fun. I got to travel a little bit. But I mean, travel back then, I don't know how it happens now or if it happens I imagine it does. But back then, it was like me and my buddy on Friday morning driving to Palo Alto, all the way to Oakland on Friday night, and then covering a game at Stanford on Saturday, and driving home after the game and getting home at 4 in the morning, and then writing the story. But you're young and stupid and impressionable, and it was a great opportunity. I had a great time. Um, I like the idea that we had the freedom to come up with our ideas, that people gave us responsibility and trusted us. I remember one time the Oregonian basically plagiarized a story that I wrote for the Emerald, and they ran it almost word for word from on somebody else's byline, and I went after them with a vengeance. And I wasn't wrong for going after them. I wasn't wrong for pointing out that you stole my story, but I was young and cocky, and I probably went in with all barrels firing in a way that I probably shouldn't have. But those are lessons that you learn from as well. So a great experience working with some great people, and I wouldn't have traded it for anything.
Between your time, both at the Daily Emerald and when you were a student at the SOJC, is there any like large takeaways that you had from your time at the UO that helped you feel prepare you for your career as a writer?
I think more than anything, it was just a confidence builder when you
Yeah.
when you do something for the first time. I mean, like when I got that in fifth grade, when I got to interview the OSU basketball coach, I remember coming out of Gill Coliseum thinking, "Hey, I can take on the world." And I think as a college student, when you go out and interview a Ronnie Lee or Steve Prefontaine, you interview the head football coach of the University of Oregon, and you're 2 feet away from him, and you're basically included in this group of reporters, almost all men at that time. But from the Oregonian, the Seattle Times, and the Register Guard, yeah, like you belong, like you are somebody, and you're in a fast heat, if I can use a track town metaphor. You're in a fast heat, as opposed to if you go to some podunk school where you don't really get that many opportunities. But we've got the Olympic trials coming here about every 4 years. So many opportunities that stretch you and grow you and give you that confidence, so that when you go out in the world, actually, in some ways, going to be sports editor of the Bulletin in Bend, my first job, was in some ways I was doing stuff less maybe significant than I was doing while I was the sports editor of the Oregon Daily Emerald, and interviewing the coach of the UCLA Bruins or something like that. Suddenly I'm interviewing the Madras JV basketball coach or something like.
Yeah, it gives you an opportunity to flex your muscles a little bit.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's my understanding too that aside from your writing, you also do public speaking and specialize in keynoting events on topics related to your books. And you say that it's your goal to remind audience members that they matter far more than they may ever know, both to their workplaces in particular and to the world in general.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you have a story or an anecdote about like what made you realize this connection, or
Yeah.
what made you want to remind audiences of their importance to their workplaces?
I think one of the books, one of my earlier books, was a book called American Nightingale, about the first nurse to die after the landings at Normandy in World War II. But this woman grew up poor, Jewish, in Poland, came to the United States, at Ellis Island in 1920, wanted to go off and help the war effort, wanted to be on the front lines with these soldiers as a nurse, and wound up dying. And after writing this beautiful letter to the soldiers, encouraging them, saying it was a privilege to take care of them. So anyway, she writes this letter, then she's killed, and the Stars and Stripes newspaper goes ahead and publishes the letter from her, not realizing that she had died.
Mm.
And the soldiers, once they realized she had died, the soldiers were so overcome by gratitude that they insisted that something be done in her honor, and they named the first hospital ship in, I think, U.S. military history in her name, the Frances Y. Slanger. Frances Slanger was someone who just reminded me that we all make a difference, and that it doesn't matter where we start out. I mean, again, this is a kid who, when she came to Ellis Island, her father had come a year before, so she's with her mom and her sister, but she's separated by them. She has an eye infection, and so she's cordoned off. She's actually placed in a cage. At that point, she was no longer part of Poland, and it wasn't yet part of the United States. She's kind of like she's in a cage. You wouldn't have thought, wow, there's somebody who's going to grow up there and make a difference in a lot of people's lives. But she absolutely instilled these soldiers with a sense of hope and a sense of purpose, I guess. These guys are fighting, trying to thwart the rise of Hitler, taking over the world. They're doing something important, but when you're in a foxhole day after day, you're not feeling like you are. But her letter instilled them with hope, and so even though she died, her legacy was that we all make a difference, and that's why I wrote a second book called Pebble in the Water, about how Pebble's a pretty small thing, but it has all of these rings that go on, and I still get emails from young people today who said, I'm a nurse now because I read American Nightingale and I was so impressed with Frances Slanger. So I think that's what I try to speak about, the fact that we all make a difference, and in different sort of ways, and maybe underestimate how important we are to those around us.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm sure that that leaves quite the impact on your audiences as well. Like that sentiment must reach deep for a lot of people.
Yeah, I've kind of learned, I think there's a tendency to want to think that you really, unless you play at the absolute major league level of the world, unless you're famous and you get so many Facebook followers or Instagram followers that you're insignificant. And I am a pretty harsh critic of that kind of thinking. I just think of the people who have influenced me. Well, Dean Ray, a U of O journalism professor of mine, not only was a great journalism teacher, but then he took a year off and went to Bend. And because I had apparently done okay in his class, he hired me to be his sports editor in Bend. Then he came back to Eugene. So he had a huge, and he wound up being a mentor to me. And still, the man is like 95 years old, and we are friends now. And that all goes back to the University of Oregon, and the relationships that I built there. And I still go to him for advice. He taught me one of the three words that saved me a lot of grief as a columnist, because I came to him. I said, "Wow, I keep writing these columns, but people keep writing and they're antagonistic and they don't like what I wrote and da da da." And he said, "Mr. Welch, three words: consider the source." And what he meant was that when somebody writes in about what you've written, it says as much about them as it does about what you've written. And so don't assume because somebody tees off on you and criticizes you that they're always right and you did something terrible. A lot of times they're people with problems and their struggles, or they see the world through skewed vision for whatever reason, some pain they've had in their past. And so I've tried to be patient with people. I've sort of found that if people just unload on me and just say, I hated your column, blah, 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 blah. If I just say to them something like, hey, I appreciate you taking the time to let me know. I understand why you feel the way that you do. But if you just sort of disarm them by just letting them have their say, that they actually, in most cases, they'll just calm down and be regular human beings. So
Yeah,
anyway, lessons
absolutely.
learned from the U of O.
Yeah, and I'm sure that there was a bunch of those as well,
Yeah,
things that you gain experience over time, that kind of thing.
yeah,
Well, you're extremely well versed in your writing career, not only having worked as a columnist for several years at the Register Guard, but also having published several books, and most recently, Seven Summers and a Few Bummers, My Adventure Hiking the 2,650-mile Pacific Crest Trail.
right.
Could you tell me a little bit more about what the process for writing that book was like, as opposed to, writing journalistically for your column? Did you find that
Yeah.
there were many similarities or a lot of differences in those writing styles?
Again, some similarities, you know,
Mhm.
you're gathering the facts and you're telling the story, but it's a different sort of story. It's a story that it spans 11 years. Took us 11 years to do the trail.
Mhm.
Um, but you're still doing journalism, you know, gathering information from notes that I took from, you know, you can go on Google Earth and basically fly over the Pacific Coast Trail and see places that you were. You look at all your photos you had. You interview your brother-in-law who you hiked every mile with. You read other people's books and see what they say about this section or whatever, and then you kind of put it all together like overlays, like transparencies, one over the other, and you have this picture of a couple of old guys hiking the Pacific Coast Trail with a bunch of young people like you around us. Um, that took me about a year to write, and it was far easier than that was. I tell people the research I did for Seven Summers and a Few Bummers was the most difficult I've done, you know, of any story I've written because it took me 11 years. I think you wind up hiking the equivalent of 26 or 16 Mount Everest up and down in terms of elevation gain. Um, Gosh, I think we wound up hiking 180 extraneous miles, miles that weren't actually on the PCT, but we needed to go off the trail to get food or get back on the trail, or we overshot a water stop and had to go back or something like that. So it was difficult, but when you get the final project and it's out and you go, wow, that's cool. And then your former your buddy that you met at the University of Oregon, Mike York, he calls you and says, well, I hope you don't mind. I've got 8 errors that I found in your book. And I've always thought that writing you have to have a blend of confidence and humility. The confidence to believe you have something to say to the world, and the humility to let others help you say it better. And so, you know, being part of the Emerald, that's a lot of that was both. It built my confidence, but also there was that humility part because you had to go into it realizing you didn't know it all because that's how you learn and grow. I've got, I don't know, 200 books on writing over here in my office. I'm 70, and I'm learning all the time. And I like that process. I like learning and stuff like that. I met with a guy today for coffee. He's writing a book, and you know, basically, I said, "Well, what books have you read to sort of teach you how to write a book?" Oh, none. And I'm just like, I wanted to say to him, you know, you gotta fuel up, man. You gotta see how other people do it. Doesn't mean you copy other people, but it helps you start framing a process that you can use yourself so that you do your best. So
Yeah, absolutely. I really like that, tidbit about, having confidence, but also humility.
yeah.
It's a very fine balance, like
And
a
then the third one is absolute perseverance because there'll be times, you know, whether it's writing for the newspaper, and that's kind of like a sprint, you know, 100-meter dashes every day, or whether it's doing a book, which is more like a marathon or a triathlon. No, regardless, you have to have that perseverance to keep going because you know everything's not going to go right. There were times I remember once in Bend, I made a big, well, I thought it was a big error. I transposed the names of the shortstop and the second baseman in a photo in a cut line, and in running the correction, I joke I'm the only person who can do this. I wound up repeating the mistake.
Oh no.
And when that happened, I remember walking off into the woods in Bend, headed toward Eugene, nothing between me and Eugene but forest, and thinking, I'm done. I am out of journalism. I'm never going back. And yet, you know, then you come back, get back on the horse and ride. So
Is there any advice that you have or that you would give to aspiring book authors?
be patient. Again, I would go back to the confidence, humility, perseverance. Um, Talk to people, get out there, take chances, be willing to fail. I mean, hiking the whole PCT. If somebody had told me at the start of that journey, this is what it's going to take for you to hike the trail, this much money, this much time, this much pain, no way I would have said yes. But I think if you go into any pursuit, um, just realize it's not going to be easy. And I think you have to decide how badly do you want it. I mean, I can remember teaching at the U of O, you know, I'd have 16 kids, and I always used to say there's there's 12 middle of the road kids who kind of want to be here, but it's not the biggest thing. And there's four who just don't want to be here. They just want to grade. And then there's four who want to go on and do something great. And I've kind of found that those uh, percentages have held true. And I think the four that really go on are the ones who not only are mentally committed, but they're willing to go through the pain and be rejected from time to time and not have everything go well to get where they want to get. So young people today, in some ways, I kind of grieve for you. And in other ways, I'm kind of excited for you because you, in a sense, like when I went to J school in the 70s, we knew what we were going to do. You know, I'm going to get it. I'm going to work here 4 years. And then I literally 2 days after I graduated at Hayward Field, I was a sports editor of the Bulletin Bend. That's just how it worked. There were newspapers everywhere. Well, newspapers are dying. That's not going to be an option. But the great thing about your generation is I think you're going to be part of this new journalism, the new journalism, and I don't know what it's going to look like, but my goodness, we desperately need to find some way to keep journalism alive, so we can keep democracy alive. For one thing, we don't want to live in a world where the city managers or the president or whoever can just take our money and do with it what they want. We need watchdogs. We need people to report what's going on. So it's an important job, and I look to your generation to reinvent the wheel, so to speak.
I'll begin to wrap it up here, but I wanted to ask if there was anything else that you wanted to leave us with, any final thoughts, anything that I didn't ask.
No, not, I'm just one person, but I mean, looking back, almost 50 years since I was at the Emerald, I would do it again in a heartbeat. I think there's just something to be said. I think if you're a curious person, you like to find answers, and I've always been that person. And you like to write, and again, I think you have to. I don't think you have to be gregarious, but I think you need to enjoy relationships with people. Sometimes contentious if you're dealing with city officials who have information that they'd like to not give to you. But I mean, I have hundreds and hundreds of relationships that I built in the last 50 years, all because I was a journalist. And when I sit down to write my novel, I'm going to go over to Yahawks in our beach cabin. I'm going to take all these old columns and I'm going to like cobble together a novel or something. And I've just had so many fascinating experiences that I never would have had I not been in this job as a journalist. So I think it's a worthy profession and a fun profession, challenging at times, but like I said, I'd do it again in a heartbeat. And I appreciate the piece that the Emerald put in my puzzle.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we're also super grateful, to have your continued support, and, thanks again so much for your time. I
All
appreciate
right.
it.
Take
Awesome.
care.